Hey everyone, Calypso here. I'm back at it again with another hot take, and that take is that Legacy of Kain never really had an identity. Let me explain. Lots of games can also be said to not really have their own identity, especially today. Chasing the trend of what works within any industry really is a normal thing. We've had a billion John Wick knockoffs since its release 10 years ago, which, depending on who you talk to, just ripped off the Raid movies. Doom clones were up the wazoo back in the day for any game with shooting in it that you collect a red, blue, or green key card. So many games today look and feel the same. It's almost cancerous, not because it's a bad game, but because they all look, play the same, and because it's a bland experience for every single one. Pick your top 5 games of the last few years, okay? Now, think that out of those 5 games that you just picked, how many almost play and look the exact same? Obviously barring a few different mechanics. This happens often. Remember that gray and brown era of the mid-2000s full of nearly the exact same military shooter? Witcher 3 kicked off this new era of weird action RPG hybrid thing, right? Whatever that was, despite that it used the Ubisoft open world formula, because what set it apart was that it's in the world of The Witcher. Fill out a map with all of these things to do, drop you into this huge, open, beautifully constructed world, and then you just kind of go and roll with it. So what about the Legacy of Kain? Well, when you describe Blood Omen to someone who's never played this series, what do you say? Do you say, well, it's like old school Zelda, but cooler because there's vampires in it? Instead of, having a couple of limited ways to kill someone, you sort of get over bombarded with ways to kill somebody, so then you just have to choose which way you want to kill somebody? When you describe Soul Reaver to someone, do you say something like, well, it's like 3D Zelda, but cooler. There's soul-sucking vampires in it, and because you have so many different ways of killing people, it almost becomes how do you kill someone rather than when to kill someone. I think there's a positive and a negative to Legacy of Kain never really having a definitive style. On one hand, you can easily explain them away like I just did in the gameplay department. Games like the classic Tomb Raiders were huge during Soul Reaver's release, so naturally as a developer I would absolutely borrow from those games. Block puzzles abound, you know what I mean? We have the benefit of this pseudo-open world, and Ocarina was big, so let's use some of that open world idea, shall we? Maybe even some of the cool combat too that's also in Ocarina of Time. Oh, and those neat dungeons that are also in Ocarina of Time, let's use those. But we won't call them dungeons, we'll just call them the general boss area, the clan area, if you will, in Soul Reaver 1, and we'll call them forges in Soul Reaver 2. Legacy of Kain has some unique mechanics, obviously, like the shifting mechanic to get around and solve puzzles, but the core loop really is heavily inspired by Zelda, Metroid, and Tomb Raider. At least the first few entries. When you play Uncharted, you know you are getting a film-like experience, for better or worse, with cool set pieces, a well-written fun story, and a solid cover shooter. You know what the experience is going to be for Uncharted. It is on the box. With Legacy of Kain, when you pick one up, you are getting a bunch of different styles. It's almost like a game of roulette. It's probably one of the most diverse gameplay experiences within all of video games. Genre is another thing. Genre for the Legacy of Kain would be action-adventure. Maybe throw platformer at the end in there, action-adventure platformer as well. If I want a Devil May Cry experience, I can simply boot up Devil May Cry. Within Legacy of Kain, I can boot up Defiance. Devil May Cry released in 2001, so you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to look at that cool combat and put it in my game too, even if it ends up being a diet version of Devil May Cry. Blood Omen 2 is considered the black sheep of the series, and it's got the most unique gameplay out of all of it, I think. You have 2 ways to play this one. You can A, use the easy mode in which you hold down the button to block during combat, or you can B, play it like a true vampire, and use the weird, timed, almost rhythm game-like blocking system for combat. You also have a super attack meter that unleashes a cool ability depending on how far you've been or what you've unlocked. I honestly don't know another game similar to Blood Omen 2. If you do know one, please let me know. The only ones that come to mind but aren't exactly there would be Musou games like Dynasty Warriors, Drakengard, stuff like that, simply because of that power meter that you get that allows you to do a cool ability. Other than that, Blood Omen 2 is a completely unique experience. We all know, however, that it's not really the gameplay that keeps this series alive, it's the narrative. Legacy of Kain is just a weird series after all, but the narrative keeps it going. How do you pitch a game series that never really sat still or became comfortable with its own gaming identity? Nosgoth, a cancelled online game set in the Legacy of Kain universe, was an asymmetrical game where each class you played was different. One was a melee range thing, one was a ranged thing, and they clashed together in some really fun games. I have some great memories with Nosgoth. Now, we are flooded with asymmetrical multiplayer games a decade later, basically, after its cancellation. Nosgoth was ahead of its time, and I'm sad the suits at Squeenix couldn't see that. It doesn't help that the development team were making weird choices as well, but whether that was on the actual developers' choices or if it was Square Enix's choices, it remains to be seen or known. Dead Sun is another cancelled project. Great video by Raina Audrin and stuff right over here. Settled on the Arkham gameplay pretty much, and a typical open world that we've come to know, albeit hopefully with less crowded bullshit and mindless objectives that I would like to think if it ever did come out, it would be good. But that was canned too, unfortunately, and once again it proved that although Legacy of Kain kind of looked at what was popular during whatever game time development was around, and using the trends, it still was a unique experience because of the world of Legacy of Kain. It's not a bad thing at all that Legacy of Kain would chase the trends of the day to try and sell copies and hop on that sort of bandwagon, because that allowed for probably the most unique series experience ever. You got something different every single time, so it feels fresh going from game to game, even when they all fall under the same genre of action-adventure platformer thingamajig. Again, genre and style are different. The only negative to not having a solid gaming identity is that it is kind of hard to pitch to new players. You can't say the entire series is similar to X or Y elevator pitch style because each one is different. One is like a classic Zelda almost. Two are like 3D Zeldas basically. One is Devil May Cry Vampire Edition, although diet, and another is the other's Blood Omen 2. I just hope that when we do get another entry, if we get another entry, it doesn't suck, and that too, it's not a Dark Souls game. I will gladly take Dead Sun back from the dead before I take a Dark Souls Legacy of Kain game. They're just not my jam. I understand the appeal, but they're not my jam. With all of that being said, I've been Calypso, and I will see you in the next one.
This is the final step. My body is a map of scars that has led me here. Centuries of torture have prepared me for this moment. I am destroyed. But I am stronger than death. I am reborn. I am a soul Reaver.